I think, one of the great misapprehensions about, method acting has suddenly got a bad rap. But if it interferes with the other people's work, you've gone wrong.
So what is your first memory of me?
That would have been when you were born.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was absolutely
how did I come across?
Delightful. Yeah. You came across well. I mean, we settled on Ronan, definitely. Now you've got me wondering. I'm pretty sure that...
I know there was some other options. There was like Finn or something.
Yeah, Finn was one. I won't mention a couple of others, but yeah, Ronan, it definitely seemed to be your name when you appeared. But what a wonderful day.
There's this kind of memory of a memory that I remember, like it's one of those things where it's like I don't know if I have the literal memory anymore of that day, but I remember remembering it as a kid. I think I must have been like 3, and we were in Rome. I think you must have been making Gangs in New York, and it was just of you standing in the doorway of the house we were living in at the time, and I remember there were peacocks.
That's right.
It's hard to remember exactly when I started thinking seriously about wanting to make films in the future, but I remember making I was always trying to kind of corral Rocco and Gio into some of my childhood best friends into making little movies on like their dad's flip camera in the backyard when I was a kid. I forget exactly how old I was when that started, but yeah, I think it was around 8th grade when I started thinking about it as a genuine something that I could really do, like, seriously.
And the film that we worked on together, which Martha starred in.
Oh yeah. We made a fake Nike commercial with my pet tortoise when I was like 15, which was.
She was a star athlete.
But yeah, no, it's hard to pinpoint the exact moment. I watched this film, Zombie Girl, when I was in like 8th grade, about a girl who, a 12-year-old girl who makes a feature-length zombie film in her small town in Texas, and there was something about that really, put a fire in me and made me want to start writing scripts.
Well, we've always, with all our boys, we just tried to follow those things that they were fascinated by. And Ronan, you were like, from the earliest possible age, you were making images as initially drawing and then soon after painting. And it was very, very clear to us that this was not just a childish impulse. It was something that was, that you had it was rooted in you, the need to express yourself in that way. So we always understood that you would be a painter. And then as you started to make moving images, it was just a sort of natural extension of that in a way, which is interesting because your mum had also
started as a painter,
and then felt at some point the need to make those images move, and that's how she made that transition.
I think, and I think also just like I'm realizing more talking about it now that moments of being on set, like for when you guys were making The Ballad of Jack and Rose on Prince Edward Island, and just seeing you guys construct this world and then kind of go into it and make it real, I think was definitely, I'm sure that was part of the reason why I started kind of messing around with film and started wanting to make moving images.
It's a fascinating thing to see a group of people all involved in the way that you would have seen it. It's not always like that on film sets, but I think it was for Anemone.
I
think we created something that had that spirit of a group of people who were all working towards the same end with goodwill, and certainly on Prince Edward Island it had that feeling of a community of people that were
Yeah, no, definitely.
striving for the same thing.
I think I felt that when seeing the clearing and the amazing things that Chris Audie did to kind of bring, and the greens team and everything on Anemone to kind of create that cloistered world that was just within that clearing. It was just the world of the film. The second you stepped onto it, there was no kind of leap of imagination needed to feel that it was real.
I can't remember who first put the idea to the other. I think maybe it initially came from me, or at least I expressed to you at one time those years ago that I hoped we'd find a way of doing some work together. As I decided to work at something else for an unknown period of time, it gave me a sense of sadness that I wouldn't have that opportunity to work with you, knowing that you'd make films. And so I think it began maybe with that. But in terms of the idea itself, we both independently developed an interest in a story about brothers.
For years, this idea had been floating around for me of wanting to find a way into brotherhood as a just as a kind of archetype, and the sort of beauty and tragedy of that relationship. I think I remember actually at one time in college when you were visiting and we were getting lunch, and I mentioned the thing about wanting to write something about brothers, but at that point I was sort of thinking about it maybe as more of a coming of age story, or something that felt more kind of autobiographical, or something that was not autobiographical but more to do with my own world and my own kind of growing up. And then when it turned out that you had that independent kind of impulse to explore brotherhood, it was kind of an amazing thing. That I think that was because we'd had that initial conversation where you said you wanted to maybe we could find something to work on together. But I think it was actually a couple years after that, I think, when we both realized that we had that the Venn diagram kind of intersected there, and that was an exciting moment.
Right, and at that stage, it was very abstract. It wasn't. There was no real focus or shape to it for either of us initially, except perhaps the notion that there'd been an estrangement. So it was a reunion of some kind. It began with a reunion of some kind, but I think we were also both really interested in the idea of the silence that exists between.
We kind of went in with the idea that it would almost be like a silent film.
Right.
And it kind of was for the first, the first 10 pages we wrote. There was no, dialogue.
Then we couldn't shut them up.
Exactly. When it rains, it pours. But then, eventually. When we ended up showing it to Jeremy and Didi at Plan B, it felt like they just really understood that that kind of I guess just the archetypal sort of mythic feeling of that relationship, and it was exciting to. That was a great moment when we realized that, like, because up until then we were sort of like, is this actually interesting to anyone else?
That's absolutely right. It was a stroke of luck that it seemed to coincide in the moment we showed it to them with something that Jeremy and Didi were also interested in. And I mean, we were both, I think, on a daily basis amazed and very grateful to find ourselves being allowed to do that work together. Yeah,
there were definitely times where we would just look around, and you almost just had to laugh at just how cosmically lucky we were to be doing it together. And
but our working relationship too. I mean, over like a lifetime, never mind just how we feel about each other as people, but in terms of work or play, we shared so many things over the years that, and making films is a game. It's like it's one with fairly drastic consequences if you get it wrong. But it is, it's just a sort of a much more complex and. But
it was fun. Somehow didn't feel complex when we were on set. I was really pleasantly surprised by how intuitively it felt like we kind of fell into that rhythm. Like it didn't feel it didn't feel like there was many growing pains in that in kind of transitioning into that.
I can't think of any quite. I just certainly didn't feel
me neither.
It just felt like a very natural process, really a continuation, which like from the work that I do, that sort of first, it mustn't be a confrontation with the camera, the beast that's waiting for you, and all the paraphernalia of a film set, the caravans and people in orange anoraks and the sound of walkie-talkies. It's a night. If you can't close off your peripheral awareness of all those things, then you're kind of lost. And so, that first day, to me, always my hope is that it feels like a continuation of the work that's begun some time before. And it felt like that because we'd said everything that needed to be said. We developed the script with each other for over a period of years.
Yeah, like 4 years.
And so it felt like just, nerve-wracking if you really paid attention to it that first day, but it just felt like a continuation.
No, I think I was hyper aware the first day of just the camera and how that was gonna, just wanting to protect your performance from that kind of intrusiveness of that, and but it was great to realize that, I think we established pretty early on just our balance of how to kind of dance with, like how your performance could kind of be in a dance with the camera without it feeling like it's kind of
totally
getting in the way. But yeah, I think the fact that it's amazing. Like I realized in retrospect how lucky we were to have that long to basically prepare, just because we wrote it together, as you said, having 4 years basically to talk about the character and the, every scene pretty much. It was like by the time we got on set, it was,
And in terms of the way in which I work, Ro, I mean, unless I'm, kidding myself, but, I would love to believe, and it's one of the great misapprehensions about, method acting has suddenly got a bad rap and seems to be like a pretty easy target, mostly for people that really know very little about it. But, it's a way of working like any other way of working. If it interferes with the other people's work, you've gone wrong. Try something else. And I hope that, I'd like to believe that was all just assimilated in the entirety of the production. It's not something that kind of forced anybody, you or Sean or my other colleagues, to have to behave any differently or do things differently.
No, if anything, it kind of made it easier because it didn't feel as much like when we started rolling, like it was a kind of effort to slip into that reality. Like it felt like it felt like we were all kind of, but from the moment you got on set, there was this, that was protected, and it wasn't, it wasn't a jarring experience at all, like kind of trying to hypnotize yourself into believing things were real, because they felt real, but it never felt like it was kind of encroaching on anyone's.
I mean, it was a brand new thing for you, because obviously over the years you'd see me being a nutter here, there, and everywhere. But from a distance or from a little distance.
Yeah.
But your first time to actually be working together in that way, I mean, I suppose potentially, it never worried me that might be a difficult thing for you to have to deal with.
No, I mean, it was just, I think growing up, there had been such mystery to me around your work. And I mean, part of that was probably because of the way the kind of mythic way it was talked about by other people, but also just my own experience of seeing you kind of disappear into that world. And then, so it was fascinating to see it from I guess the other side of the curtain, but still retaining that mystery in some ways on set, where it wasn't again, like the conversations we had leading up to it meant that we could kind of work in a
it takes the curse off it. I think it takes the curse off it. And it's true that I think a lot of people, you have to burn off preconceptions. Everyone has to, like on day one, everyone's nerves are in shreds. And you're still getting to know each other's rhythms, each other's way of working. Everyone has a way of working. It might be method or Meisner or who gives a damn what, but you're going to form yourselves into a group of working colleagues, all trying to do the same thing, essentially.
Right.
And that is one of the miracles, I think, I mean, I do think that films are minor miracles because, take that disparate group of people from all different backgrounds, with all different expectations, different ways of working, and that they cohere during a period of time into a working unit is an extraordinary thing. I mean, even to make a bad film, it's pretty hard.
Yeah,
and if you've got any hope of making a good film, you need that sense of cohesion and solidarity within the group.
I think there's a lot of these images in the film that feel like they point to something deeper than what's in the kind of the surface of the kind of the bare bones of the narrative that started to creep in pretty early on in the writing process. I remember that, and I remember I think like once we had the first instance of that, which was I think Nessa kind of the visitation of like young Nessa floating in front of Ray's bed,
and also light road.
And
remember
light,
the idea of light,
the idea
having
of light
a presence,
as
like condensing of
kind of coalescing of light.
Exactly.
That was like that. The light was this kind of unifying element between these two worlds, and this kind of that also the weather, the sense of like the weather kind of pressing down on the environment and the kind of
the presence
drama
of the landscape. In a way, it was kind of a pagan sensibility that was then overlaid onto a story that ended up having a lot of Christian thought woven through it.
Yeah, I think the pagan kind of feeling of it was there almost before we knew what the film was
pagans,
about.
Basically, so that's not surprising.
But then, all this kind of more Christian sort of Old Testament imagery started making its way in, and I was looking at as it does. Yeah, I was looking at that book, the Book of Miracles. I showed you the like illuminated manuscript.
Yeah.
That had all those depictions of
wonderful
like
book.
Blood rain and massive hail and these cosmic kind of events.
Right.
Yeah.
And the creature, which was already like a big feature of your life and therefore our life as well, had already found its way into a lot of your work as a painter, and it didn't feel like an imposition at all.
No.
I don't know how exactly.
It felt like it would feel like an imposition, but
I think it might have even occurred to me at one point.
It did. I remember I had it was this kind of strange moment where almost similar to the brother thing in the first place, where I had been thinking about the creature appearing. Suddenly I just imagined it. I think originally I imagined it maybe by the river or something, and then it was, but I was kind of afraid to say it because I didn't want it to feel like I was kind of like forcing my own mythology into product placement. But then when you independently mentioned it as something that could happen, and I think that was what was exciting in general about the process, is I feel like we kept on kind of, I guess, freeing each other to just lean into those abstractions more as we went further and further into it. And it was, by the time we got to the end, it was like, or the kind of some events that happened towards the end, it was there was just this like great.
Well, it's a spiritual life that's invested in an image, isn't it? And the reason that creature appeared to you, and subsequently you laid that down into your work as a painter, was because it had already rooted in you as a significant spiritual element. And I think once a thing has that value, then it feels, you feel free to use it in any way that you wish. It doesn't feel as if it's an interloper. And I think that was true of all the magical elements that occurred to us.
And it became a challenge then to kind of convince other people of their, or kind of explain why they had not only could exist in the film, but had to be part of that fabric. And so there was, is because a lot of it, because it's so kind of intangible, I guess, those things are all, they have, as you said, just this kind of spiritual aspect to them that felt like they came from almost like there's organized religion is a big part of the film, but then there's also this kind of it's like the film's perspective isn't aligned with that. It's a kind of, there's almost this omniscient perspective that's more aligned with the natural.
And it's like you need help as like human being. Like there's so much that you can do with human beings in the way in which they are or are not able to express themselves in a story. But it's almost like you need help from elsewhere. You need help. You need help rather in the way that music is something that can inform a piece of work in ways that you feel emotionally, but you can't intellectualize about them or identify exactly why that particular music is right in that particular. But also with those images, that I think that that Jem and Ray needed those images
to express the things they can't say. Yeah,
in a way.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I mean, because I think also music in a film is already artifice. Like there's already that, like film as a medium, it's already not reality. It's like a different. So it feels like it actually it felt like it's not a big leap to kind of use other kind of stranger devices to kind of to heighten the subjectivity of it, I guess.
Oh, Ronan, what are your plans for the future? Do tell.
I think I feel like it's such a miracle when two people find something that they're equally kind of excited about to spend that much of their lives kind of. So it's like I think I would love to do it again if we find that, that seed.
This isn't really the moment. But of course,
But it's
I think some part of us will always be looking, even if we don't find that.
No, but I hope we do.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I hope so.